very fun. I can do this. I suggest that would a big one for the Yeah, the recordings that always talk to you.
So, good morning everyone. It's nice to see so many people here in Porto. So the school is organized by European Training Network. It's supposed to train PhD students, and we thought that we're organizing this, we can also do this for more than just 10 people, which would be a bit of a waste. So it's nice that actually so many came. We will have a bunch of lectures about post-quantum crypto and schemes which are currently being designed. And you might have seen on Thursday we have a walking tour. And I think I will ask you, Louise, at some point during the day to maybe tell you exactly where it starts. So it will be somewhere in the city, and then you've got 3 hours exploring the city of Porto. And then in the evening we have and I think that's everything. And then Kathrin will start with an introduction.
Yeah, hi everybody. Welcome to the first talk. And you already mentioned that we are doing this version more than just the usual crypto crowd. So the first talk will be aiming to give a very gentle introduction to the language we use in cryptography and to the most important concepts. We because probably for some of you it's a bit early in the morning. Let's start with some anecdotes about how we used to communicate secrets back in the olden days. So the first documented example of communicating secrets, at least I'm aware of, is called the spiton, which is the old Greek word for baton or cylinder. And it was used by the ancient Greeks and Spartans to communicate group movements and stuff like that. So what did they do? They took something like, well, a baton or a cylinder, wrapped around a cloth of parchment, wrote from left to right, and then unwrapped it and sent over the unwrapped parchment. The result was that you had a long string of leather where the text was garbled, it was shifted in equidistant measures. The problem with that, of course, is that if someone intercepts the sender, they have this piece of parchment, and if they come up with the same idea, just to wrap it like around your arm and shift a bit, you can still read the message in the keyboard, which might tell you that someone is aiming to attack in the morning, which probably won't end well for them. The second example is documented according to the historian Herodotus. And he documented that Histius, the tyrant of now Anatolia, I believe, used to transmit his secret messages by shaving off some poor servant's head and just tattooing the bald head, letting the hair grow back, and then send over the slave to whomever he wished to communicate with. I mean, apart from the moral implications of non-consensual body modification, this is also not a great idea, because everyone who knows of this method, they can just intercept the slave, shake their head, and read what Herodotus was aiming to communicate. And the third example you might even know back from school or from doing a crossword puzzle in a newspaper. It's called the Caesar cipher, and probably some of you have seen this. It's a shift by 3 routes, so you shift A to D, A to C actually, B to D and so forth, to encode the separate letters. And as at least some of us have learned in school, other people aren't as dumb as you might think. They might be able to unshift the letters and read what you actually wrote about them. So also not a great method of communicating the secret. So what we see these 3 problems have in common is that techniques you use to communicate secret communication will never remain secret. This was also put into words by a mathematician called Kirchhoff, and it is now known as Kirchhoff's principle. So what he says is that it should not be a problem for your communication if the crypto system you use to communicate falls into enemy's hands. So you shouldn't just rely on obscurity. Then Vigenère had the idea to do something with the Caesar cipher. Basically, the idea he came up with was to pick a secret code word only you and your partner know, and then to use the code word to shift the letters differently. Like, say you take the code word crypto, then the rule for the first letter will be that A is mapped to C, the second rule is that A is mapped to R, and so forth. So you garble each letter differently. And the intuition underlying this cipher was that if you do not know the secret code word, then you will not get too much information about the message that is being communicated. But actually 300 years later, this intuition was disproven by mathematicians who noticed that human language has the tendency to use certain letters more often than others, which will allow you for statistical analysis, and in the end they were able to break the Vigenère cipher. So another takeaway from this short excursus is that you shouldn't rely on the fact that you yourself didn't come up with a nice attack when you were designing your crypto system. Because there might always be someone else who comes up with an even better idea. It might take some time or some progress in research. But yeah, you can't rule out the fact that something can be attacked just because you didn't come up with a way to do so. Okay, so let's switch to how we do crypto today. I guess all of you are aware that you will be using crypto a lot whenever you are on the internet. So for example, some of you still might be using Amazon, which uses the HTTPS protocol, which invokes the TLS protocol. And this involves a lot of crypto actually. And it's quite ubiquitous. I mean, apart from using Amazon, you will use it when you are doing online banking, when you're on Facebook, in case you are, when you're using Netflix, when you're banking, when you're using Gmail, and so forth. And of course, there's also a plethora of different instant messaging apps that offer end-to-end encryption. Some of you might be using, for example, Telegram or Signal or WhatsApp. They all use end-to-end encryption. Okay, so if we think about what we actually want from cryptography, from a very high level, you can split it into two different goals. The first goal is that your business is just your business and no one else's, so we want to keep secrets a secret. And the second thing is that if someone sends a message to you, you actually want to be sure that this message came from them and not from anybody else, and that it didn't get altered on transit. So let's start with privacy first, and let's look at what crypto can do for us if we are aiming for privacy. So this is the area of secret key encryption. So assume someone wants to communicate some sensitive data. Let's think of maybe Edward Snowden, who wants to send over some document to the Guardian, and he's being perfectly aware that he will be surveyed. So what could he do? Could use a secret key encryption algorithm that takes as input a secret key that he shares with the Guardian, and use an encryption algorithm which will garble the plain text, produce the garbled ciphertext, which he can send over the wire, which might be surveyed by some agency or someone else. And the Guardian can use a decryption algorithm, which will help him ungarble the ciphertext back to plain text. And what we are aiming for is that we have confidentiality, even if people were checking the wire, assuming that the attacker did not manage to get hold of the secret key that is being used to encrypt. So as a first information theoretic example, we can look at the one-time pad, where we will pick a key uniformly at random from a set of bit strings of length L. And the plain and ciphertexts will also be bit strings of length L. To encrypt, we will do some operation we call XOR, which means that we take K and M, we add them in each position bitwise, and just take the modulo 2. So we divide by 2 and take the remainder. For example, if we have 0, 1, XOR 1, 1, in the first position, we XOR 0 and 1, which will give us 1. And in the second position, we will XOR 1 and 1, which gives us 2. In modulo 2, this will be 0. And to decrypt, we do exactly the same operation. Why does this work? Because if we first encrypt and then decrypt, we XOR the key 2 times. So we have the doubled key plus the message, and if we divide by 2 and take the remainder, the key just vanishes. So we get back to the original plaintext. Okay, so we already said that we want some form of secrecy, and the first and nicest definition we can come up with is called perfect secrecy, which intuitively tells us that even if someone sees a particular ciphertext, and even if they know that the ciphertext should belong to one of 2 messages, they will not be able to infer with any chance which message it actually was to which the ciphertext belongs. And more formally, we formalize this as the property that if you fix a ciphertext into messages M1 and M2, the probability that encrypting M1 will result in C, and the probability that encrypting M2 will result in C is exactly the same, where you take the probability over the choice of the key. Okay, one important fact that I should mention right away that was proven by Shannon is that this kind of perfect secrecy is only possible if there are many, many keys, because the key space needs to be as large as the message space. So let's combine the two things we just saw, the one-time pad and our definition of perfect security, and let's convince ourselves that the one-time pad actually matches the security definition. And we can do it by an example. The reasoning in general will always go exactly the same way. So suppose the adversary gets some ciphertext 0, 1, and he knows that the message will be either 1, 1 or 0, 1. But he didn't get into possession of the secret key. Now I will try to convince you that you will not be able to tell which message M was actually encrypted, and this is due to the fact that for both messages there exists exactly one key under which the message would have encrypted to that ciphertext. So in the case message 1 is 1, 1, we would have the key 1, 0, and in the case of the message M2 equals to 0, 1, we would end up with the key 0, 0. And since we are picking keys uniformly at random, both keys are equally likely. So from the attacker's point of view, both messages could have been with the same probability. However, this is only secure if we use the one-time pad once, which is exactly why we call it the one-time pad, right? So suppose an adversary sees two ciphertexts for two different rounds of encryption, and say he sees that the two ciphertexts are exactly the same. So if we were aiming for perfect secrecy, this would basically mean that he has no clue which message was encrypted in for the first round and which message was encrypted for the second round. But since the two ciphertexts are the same, and since encryption just always does the same operation, so for each message you will always get the same ciphertext, he now knows that a message was resent. And this is not something we would like to see in an encryption scheme, because it might be that, for example, an attacker wiretapped, saw someone attacking at dawn. Now he sees the same message or the same ciphertext, so he knows that we will be attacking at dawn once more. Okay, so what we saw is that the one-time pad is really nice if we have large keys and if we only need to send a single shot encryption. But in practice, we usually want to encrypt arbitrary amounts of data, often with a single short key. So the one-time pad might not be fitting for what we actually need in practice. And the way we will do it, we will see in a few slides, but to be happy with what we will see in the next slides, we will have to relax our security goals a bit. So from now on, we will say that we are already happy if we satisfy some computational security property, which is called INCPA security, which stands for indistinguishability, because you want that encryptions of a message M1 are indistinguishable from an encryption of a message M2, even if you choose the message yourselves as an attacker. This is called chosen plain text attack because you choose the two messages. As an example for how we can achieve such security notions, we will start with talking about permutations. So for the people who do not yet know what a permutation is, it is a mapping from some set into some set that is one-to-one, meaning it has an inverse. And as an example, you see on the bottom half of the slide the set to be ABC. And in the first row, you see a mapping that maps A to C, B to A, C to B. So you could also map back to the original letter, meaning you have an inverse. And if you look at the bottom, you see that B and C are both mapped to B. So if you wanted to go back from B, you wouldn't know where to go. So this doesn't have an inverse. All right, and we will use such permutations to define an object called block ciphers, and this is what we will actually use to encrypt. So block cipher is basically a collection of permutations and you specify which one of the commutations you want to use by picking a key. So formally, this is a two-input function that takes as input some key and some bit string of some length L, and will output a bit string again of length L. And yeah, the restriction is that each function ek, so if you fix a particular key, you get a commutation. And for practice, we will also require that these functions are efficiently computable because we want to implement them on our computers, right? So how would we use such block ciphers to actually encrypt? Here is a naive approach how we could do this. So say we have some message that consists of some blocks M1 to ML, then we could just take each block separately, use the block cipher to encrypt it, and then send over the concatenation of the results. This would lead to the security requirement that someone who's setting the wire should not be able to infer any information from the ciphertext about the plain text or the secret key that is being used. As an example for such a block cipher, we'll talk about the data encryption standard, which was initiated in the 70s when the NBS, which is now called the National Institute for Standards, aimed to standardize a block cipher. IBM came up with a design that was called Lucifer, and it basically evolved into this. And yeah, it was taken on with open arms, it was widely adopted, used in ATMs and so forth. And the high-level design of this standard is that it consists of a so-called Feistel network, which we'll see on the next slide, made of successive rounds. And each round is a simple operation that uses just a bit of the secret key. So let's dive more into it, how it actually looks. Let's look at a single Feistel round. So what we do in a Feistel round is that we first take a message and split it into the left half and the right half. And on the left half, we will apply the one-time pad we just saw. But instead of using the secret key, we will take the right half of the message to derive the key for the one-time pad. So we will apply some nonlinear function that is dependent on the key to the right half, and then XOR with the left half. And after that, we swap signs because we want to do several rounds, and always XORing on the left-hand side would be great. So if we think about it, if we swap back and then do the same operation, we will get back to the original message. Why is this interesting? This is interesting because it tells us that this actually is a permutation. And if one round looks simple enough to you, what we do in this is that we chain many of such rounds together to garble the plain text some more. And we will always use another portion of the secret key. Okay, however, so this design might look as if it makes sense to you. There's one vulnerability though, which is aligned with the length of the keys that are involved. So originally the key length was 56 bits. And for 56 bits, it was conjectured that it might be feasible to do brute force attacks where you just try out all of the different possibilities for the key and check whether this makes sense, and thus learn the secret key. And while people at first were like, no, but is this really feasible? I don't know. There were some attacks constructed first in 1998 by the Electronic Frontier Foundation, but the attack used some highly dedicated material, and it was pretty expensive, 250,000. But in 2006, the University of Bochum and Kiel worked together to build a device that is much more affordable. And this also kind of reflects how we increase our computational powers more and more. So if DES is still being used today, which it probably shouldn't, then it is used as triple DES, which just does DES, but 3 times. First you encrypt, then you decrypt with another key, and then you encrypt with yet another key. However, this should be understood as hopefully soon deprecated, and it has been replaced by a new standard established in 2001. It is called AES, and it was chosen during a competition, also established by NIST. It uses a slightly different design. It's not Feistel based, but we won't go into the details here because we need to cover a lot of other interesting things. But let's just believe that we now have a block cipher that works nicely. So we have something that allows us to encrypt plain texts of a certain length. But what if the messages are longer than this length of the block? What do we do then? So what we already saw on the slide with Edward Snowden was a naive idea to just split and encrypt blockwise, right? This is called electronic codebook. So we take message M0 encrypted, get C0, so forth until the last block, and then we just concatenate. If we think about it, this might not be a great idea because the encryption algorithm we are using is deterministic. So if we are reusing a particular block, this will be noticeable in the output cipher text. And there's actually a graphical example, which is called the ECB penguin, where people took the raw data of an image, the penguin, and used this to encrypt this raw data. This is not how we would communicate a picture in practice usually, but it really shows nicely that after encrypting, you see way too much structure of what you were encrypting. And to see other modes of operation that are better, and also the quantum impact on how we deal with block ciphers, I refer to Andre's talk in the afternoon. Okay, so to summarize what we saw so far, perfect secrecy is very, very expensive. We always have to switch out the keys and they have to be large. In practice, we will use block ciphers to encrypt blocks in a secure mode of operation, like the electronic codebook, to encrypt messages that are longer than a single block. And by this we can basically conclude our discussion of secret key privacy. And notice that we did not yet talk about how we achieve authenticity or integrity. So maybe, let's think, maybe secret key encryption already provides integrity. Imagine SpongeBob had lunch with his boss, Mr. Krabs, and of course, because Mr. Krabs always wants his money back, SpongeBob will reimburse him by sending over some money via PayPal. So Mr. Krabs is tapping the wire and knows that some message will go to PayPal, and since he always is trying to make more money, he also learned a bit about crypto and knows his block ciphers. So you will be able to tweak the cipher text such that it decrypts to pay 99,000 instead of pay 20 euros. This isn't great, right? But it is still possible if you are just using a block cipher, because they have some structures you will be able to exploit. So what we will want to add is some measure to actually ensure integrity of the message that is being sent. So one basic tool that we will be using here is called hash functions, which are functions that generate a short handle or a fingerprint from a long amount of data. So formally, we will have a function that takes as input bit strings of arbitrary length and map them to bit strings of length n, and the output we will call a digest, handle, or fingerprint. And hash functions are quite ubiquitous, so we will use them to authenticate messages. We will see this on a few slides. They can be used for digital certificates, for public key encryption, or other infrastructures. But actually in the second half of the talk, we will also see how they are used today in public key encryption and digital signatures. And we also use them to store passwords in a way that is not completely secret. Okay, so given that there are so many different use cases, it might be less of a surprise that there are also different security goals we might want to achieve with such hash functions. So for example, we could want that the fingerprints are hard to compute without knowing the data, so no one else can compute a valid hash output for what you wanted to fingerprint. We might want that they change a lot when the data is changed only a tiny bit, meaning they are kind of unpredictable. We might want that they uniquely identify the data, and that they do not give enough information to reconstruct the data, because this might, for example, mean that you are breaking some secrecy notion. So more formally, we usually talk about 3 different types of security definitions that are all in a certain relation. The first definition is pre-image resistance, which means that it's hard to find a pre-image. So say you are given an output Y, it's hard to find an X that is mapped to this Y by the hash function. This is what we call a pre-image. So typically, there are many such pre-images, but we want that they are still hard to find. The second definition is second pre-image resistance, which is somewhat similar in spirit, but now you are given a random input X, and it's hard to find a second pre-image that is mapped to the same thing. And the third property is called collision resistance, which means that it's hard to find 2 arbitrary inputs that are mapped to the same thing. And if we spend a second to think about it, it might be noticeable that these tasks are increasingly harder from bottom to top. Okay, now we saw what we might be asking from hash functions. And we will look at how hash functions are being done in practice. And the example I picked is SHA-2, which is Secure Hash Algorithm 2, which was designed by NSA in 2001. And it is built on using a particular construction, Merkle-Darmstadt, which is quite important in crypto. And what Merkle-Darmstadt is that it takes a compression function and builds a hash function around that. Compression function is a family of key functions that have inputs of a fixed size 2n, and the data gets compressed to half the size, hence the name compression function. And the main idea of Merkle-Darmstadt is that it is in practice easier to build fixed size compression that is sufficiently secure, and if you use this framework, MD will basically give you a hash function for free. So how will we build our hash function from a compression function? What we do is to take the message and split it into blocks of length n. It might be that we have to pad the last block of the message such that it is also of length n if the message wasn't of length a multiple of n. And then we use these blocks as the first half of the input to the compression function. As the second half, we will use some, we will start by using some initialization vectors, and after that we will just take the output of the former compression route as the second half. This is done to deal with a certain kind of attack. We are not going into detail today, but the intuition is that by adding this initialization vector, we get a compression that is unpredictable and such that we cannot play around with the messages, and just by playing around with the messages, control the output of the hash function. Yeah, some advantages of this function are that this simplifies the security reasoning to some extent. So there's a proof that if the compression function is collision resistant, then so is the resulting hash function. This is nice because then you only have to think about whether the compression function is collision resistant and not the overall construction. This is actually something we do in crypto a lot. We'll also see this later. And it's also nice because we have incremental computation, right? The messages, this might be an incoming data stream. And we only process it blockwise, which means this whole object could fit nicely on a smaller device that might be limited in the amount of data it is able to process. Okay, so we talked about SHA-2. I will also briefly mention the predecessor, SHA-1. Flaws were known since 2005, but as it usually is, some guys in academia say, hey, this doesn't look secure, and people kind of shrug because no break has yet happened. And then there were attacks made public 2017 and 2020. So people actually started listening and thought, okay, maybe we should split out SHA-1. However, it's still used in practice, for example, in Git. But I guess over time it will vanish. Yeah, SHA-2 currently is still secure and it is widely used. And it also has antecessor, which is called SHA-3, which was recently established during another standardization effort, but it is not based on the same design framework we saw on the last slide. It's not based on the Hövelmanns version. Okay, so let's assume that we are now happy with knowing how to build a hash function, and let's think about whether this will actually be enough to provide integrity. So we're going back to SpongeBob and Mr. Krabs and think about whether sending along a hash of the message will be enough to ensure the integrity of the message that arrives on the payload side. So the problem is, we already know that Mr. Krabs is very smart and can garble the ciphertext such that it decrypts to a message he likes better. And if we only hash the ciphertext, then Mr. Krabs can do this on his own, right? So we didn't gain anything. This is not a proper integrity measure because it doesn't involve a secret key. So let's look at how we could maybe tweak the approach a little bit and include a secret key to actually provide integrity. So this is called a message authentication code, so a code to authenticate a message, which you can envision as some kind of checksum that takes as input a key and a message, which might be a plain text or ciphertext depending on context, to produce an authentication tag. And the goal is that the Mac can convince, for example, PayPal, that the message really comes from, for example, SpongeBob. So more formally, we will formalize this security notion as something called unforgeability, meaning computing a valid Mac without knowing the secret key is hard. Even if someone like Mr. Krabs would be allowed, before trying to forge the Mac, to request Mac on any message he likes, as long as he does not request the Mac and then just send it along, right? That would be a trivial. So he needs to, after requesting a lot of Macs on his own, he needs to be able to compute a valid Mac for a message that he did not yet request a Mac for. Okay, so we already saw hash functions by their own that don't work so nicely. We saw it might be nicer to involve a secret key. And maybe the first idea we could have is to just take a hash function and to create an authenticated code. We could just hash the message, but put in the secret key at the beginning. So the question now is this secure, or in other words, is it hard to produce a valid message authentication code for some message and prime if we can actually request Macs for any other message we like? And at first this might intuitively look secure because we do not know the secret key, right, as an attacker. But if we think back about how hash functions are built in practice, for example, if we think back to the Merkle-Darmstadt construction, we see that we have this iterative hashing structure where we take each block separately, put it through the compression function, then take the next block and so forth. And this is something that an attacker will be able to exploit. So for example, we take a message hello and ask for the Mac for this message hello. We get as the tag the hash function evaluated on the secret key and the message hello. And now we will view this message hello in padded block structure, meaning we split it into blocks of 4 letters and pad the last block. So we just add some padding here, and then we append another block, which, for example, could be dog. Then if we compute the tag for hello dog, this would be, so this would be ham, this would be the padded dog, and this would be the dog, and there's the key. So basically, we would get back to the result that we can also just evaluate the hash function on the tag we just obtained, together with dog. So without knowing the secret key, because it was already processed in the first blocks, we can forge a new tag for a message for which we didn't request a message authentication code. So this is not yet secure. Then you might ask yourself, maybe it would work better if we push the key to the end, and this is one of the basic ideas we are using in the HMAC construction. So we put the key at the end to prevent exactly this kind of attack that we just saw, because now you would need to know dog and then concatenate it with K. But we will also put the key at the beginning to deal with collisions. And to make sure to not use the same secret key twice in the construction, we will sort or one-time pad it with some different padding strings. Okay, so this was a very brief overview about how we achieve secrecy and integrity, but we looked at them separately. And now, since in practice we usually want to have both at the same time, you could ask yourself, can we somehow combine these two different building blocks such that we achieve privacy and authenticity at the same time? And there are three basic approaches how we could do this. So the first one, which might also look quite natural to us, is to first encrypt and also map. So we have a plain text. We have two keys, one for the encryption scheme, one for the message authentication code. And we just encrypt the plain text. We also apply the MAC and we concatenate the result. So if we ask ourselves whether this preserves privacy, even if the encryption scheme has this security notion that we talked about, we noticed that adversaries now can again detect that messages were resent because the MAC is deterministic. So if you encrypt the same message twice, you will end up with the same tag, and an attacker will see that you are sending the same message again. And for integrity, this is also not optimal because it might be possible for an attacker to play around with the ciphertext such that the ciphertext still decrypts to the same plaintext. In this case, the MAC would still be valid because it still belonged to the correct plaintext, but the attacker didn't, the attacker was someone else than the person who sent the encryption. Okay, maybe better approach would be to first use the message authentication code and then encrypt. Because if we ask our encryption to hide recent messages, and you are computing a new tag even if you have the same tag, because now you are resending a plain text, you will still get a different encryption if the encryption scheme is nice enough. So privacy will probably be preserved. But for integrity, we still have the same problem as before. And the probably best approach would be what we call encrypt then MAC, which is using IPsec, where you take the plain text, you encrypt it, you end up with the ciphertext, and you will, instead of making the plain text, you will now be making the ciphertext to create the tag. So this actually preserves integrity because it will not be able to compute the right tag for a garbled ciphertext without knowing the secret key for the message authentication code, provided that the message authentication code is secure. And we will see on the next slide that this will also preserve privacy, provided that the encryption scheme is sufficiently secure. So we will actually dive a bit deeper and quickly look at the proof. How would we prove that encrypt then MAC satisfies the security notion? So say we have an attacker that tries to encrypt, tries to attack the encrypt then MAC scheme in this privacy setting. So what is he tasked with doing? He will choose two messages M1 and M2. He can choose them by himself. you will get an encryption of either the message M1 or M2, and you will get the message authentication code of this ciphertext. And now he is tasked with distinguishing whether he got an encryption for M1 or M2. This is exactly the security game, which we call a CPA security game. And the tool to argue that this will be hard for an attacker to achieve is to turn a successful attack on this encrypt and MAC scheme into a successful attack on the invoked encryption algorithm. This is something we call a security reduction. And the high-level reasoning then is, well, but we thought that encrypt is secure. So if encrypt is secure by construction, no successful attack on encrypt and MAC can then exist, right? So we can basically rule out that this is even possible. So how would such a reduction work? What we will do is to use the attacker that is able to break encrypt and MAC as a subroutine in our own attack. Okay, so now we are the reduction. We are trying to attack the encryption functionality. What we do is we start to initialize the attacker. He will choose some messages M1 and M2. We will just forward them to the encryption functionality with which we are playing when we are trying to break the underlying encryption algorithm. We get either an encryption of M1 or M2. And we can just compute the MAC on our own, because if we are an attacker who is playing around with encrypt, we can just simulate the message authentication codes on our own. So we will provide the ciphertext and the tag to the attacker who is trying to break encrypt the MAC. And at some point, he will say, okay, this belongs either to message M1 or M2, and we will just copy what he says. So if the attacker was able to distinguish these two types of encryptions, then so are we. If he's successful, then so are we. And when we are assuming that we cannot be successful because encrypting is secure, then we can rule out that this attack exists. Okay, and maybe this is a good time for a very short break. So let's say we start again in 5 minutes, and you can come up with questions if you want. Okay, so by now we have seen a few things that you can do when you already have established a shared symmetric key with the partner you want to communicate with. But the central question still is, how do we actually share such a secret key? In principle, you could always generate a very long, nice secret key, store it on a USB stick, put it in a lockable suitcase, send over a special agent, and the special agent hands over the lockable suitcase together with the key, and the other person can use the key to then encrypt. Well, I guess I do not need to convince you that this is not a very feasible approach if you just want to add your uncle to the family's group chat, or, I don't know, book a hotel or something. So this is where we switch our way of thinking from secret key encryption to public key encryption. And public key encryption is very nice in the way that it allows you to establish ad hoc communications without having to rely on a secret key in the beginning. So imagine a scenario where Alice sits in Tokyo and she needs to tell Bob that he needs to sell some stock. And Bob sits in London. And they don't have a lot of time, so sending over a secret agent wouldn't be feasible in the first place. So what public key encryption does for you is that it allows Bob to generate a key pair. The public key and the secret key will use in a bit. You can imagine them to be a bit like a lock with a key for the lock. So the lock you can easily slide together and lock things, but it will be very hard for you to unlock without the secret key, unless you are very good at lock picking, but I will get into that. Okay, so what Bob does is that he generates the key pair, he stores the secret key to himself on his computer and nowhere else, hopefully, and he puts the public key on a public key inventory we call the key server. And this is public, so everybody will be able to look up his public key. So now if Alice wants to send an encrypted message to Bob, she can ask the key server for the public key of Bob, we'll get it back, and then use it to lock the message. Yeah, and then she can just send it over, and Bob can use his secret key to unlock the message and read it. Okay, now let's talk about what we would expect in terms of security. So there's always a bad guy in the story, right? And in this case, the bad guy will be able to tap the wire, and he will also be able to ask the key server for any public key, because to the key server, it doesn't make any difference who is asking for a public key. Okay, so he will be in possession of the public key, and he might be able to observe an encryption of some plain text. And we want to make sure that even if the attacker sees such a ciphertext, he will not be able to tell whether the ciphertext belongs to sell or hold or whatever he wanted to communicate. This is called, again, ciphertext indistinguishability. And we formalize this as an indistinguishability game, which we call, again, indistinguishability under chosen plain text attacks. It has a very similar name to the symmetric key scenario, because it's just the public key counterpart to the symmetric scenario. And in these games, there are two games, the left game and the right game. In both games, the adversary gets a public key, picks two messages, M1 and M2, and he gets an encryption. In the left game, it's an encryption of the left message, M1, and in the right game, it's an encryption of the right message, M2. And now the adversary is tasked with guessing which game it's playing. So this is just a formal definition of this nice little picture. So question, can we have NCPA security, meaning indistinguishability of the two encryptions, if encryption is deterministic? Meaning encrypting a message M will always give the same result. Let's quickly think about it. So the answer is no, because if the attacker gets an encryption of either M1 or M2, and encrypting will always give the same result, he could just encrypt the two messages himself, because he knows the public key, and see which encryption he got, right? So this isn't great. Nonetheless, however, it could still be that such an encryption scheme that is deterministic has encryptions that are very hard to invert. So if you get a ciphertext, it's really hard to get back to the same message. This is still possible, and sometimes, depending on our use case, this actually will be enough. So as one example, how we do public key encryption, let's quickly look at textbook or schoolbook RSA, where we will do computations with primes. What I'm showing you here is not to be used in practice. It's a simplification of a protocol that was used in TLS's predecessor, and we, in practice, we have to take a lot of care when trying to implement this. Anyhow, the simple idea goes like this: you pick two prime numbers, let's say 5 and 17. You multiply them, say we get 85. And you will use this prime product as part of your public key. As the second part, to generate your secret key as well, you will pick two numbers such that modulo 85, so when you are dividing by 85 and take the remainder, you will always, and then you exponentiate with E, and then with D, you will get back to the original message. And if you're taking a prime product, it can be shown that such numbers always exist and that you can find them efficiently. So this shouldn't be too much of a hassle. So as an example, let's pick E equals 5, B equals 13, and let's just start with X equals 2. If we raise 2 to the power of E, so to the power of 5, we get 32. If we then raise it by the power of 3, of D, which is 13, we will get something that is super large, but it can be mathematically proven that it will have remainder 2, as all of the other numbers, 3, 4, 5, and so forth. Why is this useful? We'll see in a few slides. So first, Bob stores his public key, 85, and the public exponent E on the key server. Alice will just request his public key. It's always in public key crypto. And then she can use the math to log her message with this public key 85 and E. So what she'll do is to convert the message itself into some integer that is smaller than 85. She will raise this to the power of E, which was part of the public key. She will divide by 85, which also was part of the public key, keep the remainder, and this remainder will be her encryption of the message sent. So she can send it over. And why can Bob unlock? Because he has this secret exponent D that will get him back the original message, because you can raise the remainder you get by the power of D and get back to the same message. Okay, so the overall functionality should work, but why is this secure? And the security intuition is that this encryption algorithm we just saw, together with the decryption algorithm, is something we call a trapdoor computation. So if we make this a bit more formal, we take Sn a prime product, like on the previous slide, and we pick E and D such that dividing x raised to the power ed by n and then taking the remainder will get you back to x. And we can compute, we can define the function we call our state function, which maps the number smaller than n to the number smaller than n and just raises to the power of e. So since raising by the power of d will always get you back to the original element, we know that this is a one-to-one mapping, meaning it is a permutation. We call it trapdoor because it's easy to compute in one direction. So computing x raised to the power of e is easy, but inverting can be differently hard depending on what you actually know. So if you only know n and the public exponent e, it's believed to be very hard to compute the inverse, assuming that we chose the parameters appropriately. But if you have the secret exponent d, it's again easy because then you can just use raising to the power algorithm that's efficient. Okay, and what we also see here is that this RSA function is deterministic, so the respective encryption will be deterministic. And I already tried to convince you that this will not result in an encryption scheme that's NCPA secure, but nonetheless, at least encryptions are to invert. That's already something. Okay, one attack we did not yet look into was that an attacker can actually do meaner things than just observing encryptions and looking for the public key. For example, what they could do would be to see an encryption that was sent by Alice and just garble it a bit, and then send it to Bob's notebook and wait for the response. So at a first glance, this might look as if you shouldn't be able to get anything from that, but in practice, it actually allows you to derive some information about the original plain text that was encrypted by Alice. And this was a very famous attack derived in 1998 by Beichenbacher. And I think the impact was quite heavy, and it also came kind of out of the blue because these attacks where you send garbage ciphertexts to a notebook and see what happens were considered to be of academic interest back then. And when people were actually able to break PKCS, this created quite some waves because you had to do a lot of updating very quickly after that. Okay, so what we will want to practice is to have security against these mean ciphertexts kinds of attacks. And we will call this indistinguishability under chosen ciphertexts attacks, because we now consider an attacker that can choose his own ciphertexts to see how Bob's notebook reacts. So the overall setup of the game is exactly get a public key, you pick two messages, you get an encryption of either M1 or M2, and then you have to guess in which game you play. But additionally, you are now allowed to request decryptions for any ciphertext you choose, except for one, because if you ask for a decryption of the challenge ciphertext with which you were provided, you could easily and trivially break the game, right? So this is the one decryption query you cannot make. But for any other ciphertext, you are allowed. Okay, so we have a basic understanding of what public key encryption does, and now we get back to what we actually wanted, which is transmitting a symmetric key. First, you could ask yourself, okay, but now we do not even need a symmetric key to send an encrypted message, right? Why don't we just use public key encryption? And the answer is that symmetric key encryption usually is way more performant than public key encryption. So it's nicer to just use public key encryption in the beginning to establish a symmetric key, and then use the symmetric algorithm afterwards. And the functionality we will use for that is called a key encapsulation mechanism. So what does such a key encapsulation mechanism do? How does it look? It consists of three algorithms. The first one is exactly like for public key encryption. You have a key generation algorithm that outputs a public key pair. The second algorithm is a bit like a counterpart to public key encryption. It uses a public key to create some symmetric key, which we call KSM, and a ciphertext C, which we also sometimes call an encapsulation of C, because it basically is the capsule that is around the key. And you have a decapsulation algorithm that Bob will use that takes as input the secret key and is able to recreate the symmetric key from the ciphertext. Okay, and this will allow Alice to send over a symmetric key to Bob that only he can hopefully be able to recover from the ciphertext or encapsulation. Alright, now the security definition is in its intuition similar to the security definition for public key encryption. We want that the ciphertext should leak substantial information about the symmetric key on which Bob and Alice will be. So we will also formalize this as an indistinguishability game in which the adversary gets a public key, but now he doesn't ask for plain texts because plain texts don't exist anymore for CAMs. Instead, he gets a ciphertext or encapsulation C that was computed via the encapsulate algorithm, and he either gets really the key that is belonging to the ciphertext or a key that is uniformly random. And he should be able to tell whether he got the proper key or a uniformly random one. Okay, so let's look at how we build such things in practice. So quite recently, I think I started working on this like now 7 years ago. There was a competition also established by NIST to standardize new CAMs that are based on post-quantum problems instead of stuff like RSA. And what you can see if you are looking at the submissions is that they all share from a very high level the same approach. They first build some public key encryption scheme that is based on some hardness assumption. And we will see a lot about these different hardness assumptions throughout the week. And then they will use something that is called Fujisaki-Okamoto transformation, which is a recipe that allows you to turn public key encryption into key encapsulation. And if we, for example, look at the NIST winner Kyber, this is module LWE encryption plugged into this transformation recipe. So let's take a quick look at how this works. So we want to establish a symmetric key, and we can use some public key encryption scheme because we assume that we already know how to build this. For example, module LWE. So what we will do is to pick a random message M, encrypt M, and send over the encryption of M, exactly like in the public key encryption scenario. Now the question is, what should we pick as the symmetric key? So couldn't we just pick the symmetric key to be the message we encrypted? Does anyone see a problem with that? Yeah, by my definition, it might be that if you establish it like that, it's not indistinguishable. Because, for example, you could be working with a deterministic public key encryption schemes. There are actually some submissions to NIST that encrypt deterministically. And if you encrypt deterministically and you get the original message as the key and you have to distinguish it from random, then you can just encrypt the message and see whether this is the ciphertext you received as your childish ciphertext. And then it's super easy to tell whether this key was the proper key or random. So, okay, this isn't great. What could we do instead? What we will do instead is to use a hash function. And to create the symmetric key, we will feed the message through the hash function, hoping that the hash function behaves nicely enough such that it hides the information about the message that we were using. Yeah, on the right-hand side, it still works exactly the same way. You can decrypt the ciphertext to get the message and you can feed it through the hash function, and you have your symmetric key. Okay, and this is actually secure, making some pretty strong assumptions. So the way we prove security of this idea is, it's done in a certain proof heuristic. It's called random oracle model, and you will learn a bit more about this in the next talk. But what we do is that we assume that the hash outputs are unpredictable and unrelated. So even if you, as an attacker, see this hash value, it will be very hard to tell this apart from random unless you really know the pre-image that was used to compute the digest. So you would need to compute the hash function yourself, evaluate it on the message M. But to know the message M, this would basically mean that you were able to invert the encryption scheme, right? And if we assume that the encryption scheme is hard to invert, this will not be possible. Okay, but again, I cannot stress enough that this is a proof heuristic which uses some way of modeling the hash function that has been subject to debate for, I think, at least 30 years or so. Okay, now we are almost there. The one thing I have skipped so far is that we said we wanted security even if an attacker is able to request encapsulations for any ciphertext. Right? There are these chosen ciphertext attacks that we want to rule out. And I will only give the high-level intuition on that. So what we do with the Fujisaki-Okamoto transformation is that we slightly alter how the encapsulation mechanism encapsulates. We alter it in a way such that the decapsulation algorithm will actually notice if you are sending a malicious ciphertext, and you will just punish those by rejecting to return a meaningful key. So for an attacker, it will now be hard to request decapsulations that are actually useful to him and not just a simple, no, I'm not talking to you because the ciphertext doesn't look right. And the best way to alter the CAM is still subject to debate today. So we're still looking into what the nicest way would be to achieve this property. Yeah, as takeaways, we have seen that public key encryption schemes give us privacy without having to resort to secret meetings, and CAMs make this more efficient because they allow us to establish a symmetric key in the beginning and then resort to symmetric encryption schemes. We have a cooking recipe that turns public key encryption into a key encapsulation mechanism that is called Fujisaki-Okamoto. And on a high level, we use a label approach that is very common in crypto. We assume that we already know how to build a simple primitive, like, for example, public key encryption. We push it through some transformer, like the Fujisaki-Okamoto transformation, and we get a more complex primitive, like a key encapsulation mechanism for free. And this is really nice because the more complex your primitive gets, the harder it is to analyze in practice. And if you have a provably secure transformer, you can focus all your cryptanalytic approaches to the simpler primitives. So basically you're bundling all of your resources on attacking a smaller problem. Okay, but so far we haven't talked about we would achieve data authenticity and integrity in the public key setting, and this is the last part of the talk. So probably most of you have already seen digital signatures, but let's quickly recall it anyways. They work a bit like maps, so they are basically, you can imagine them to be the public key counterpart to message authentication code. Now we switch the roles. Now Alice has the secret key because she wants to sign a message and to send it to Bob, and Bob needs to be able to verify that this message was really sent by Alice. And you can imagine Alice's secret key to be something like a sigil ring, something that only she possesses, but there are prints of the sigil ring pushed into wet, so everybody can know that someone signed this message who is actually in possession of the sigil ring. The security goals, accordingly, are a bit similar to the security goals for message authentication codes. We will again ask that the scheme is unforgeable, meaning computing a valid signature without knowing the secret key is hard, even though the attacker will always know the public key, of course. And what we want in practice usually is that it's really hard to sign a new signature, even if you are allowed to request signatures from the system for any other message. So again, we have these chosen message attacks. One major difference between signatures and MACs is that there is something we call repudiation. So imagine a scenario in which Alice sends a signed or MAC'd, so authenticated contract to Bob. In the signature setting, Bob can now go to court and convince the judge that Alice actually signed the contract, because only Alice has the secret key, so only she could have signed the contract. In the message authentication code scenario, both have the same shared key, right? So Bob could just sign any contract himself using the key and just claim that it was Alice who signed this contract. So that's one of the main differences between MACs and signatures. Okay, if we want to take a brief look at how we could construct such a signature in practice, we get back to the RSA function that we already saw when we were talking about public key encryption. So again, we have a prime product n, we have some elements e and d, such that if we raise to e first and then to d, we get back to the same message. And like before, we set the public key to be the modulus n and the public exponent e, and the secret key, so our sigil ring, now is the secret exponent e. So how would we sign a message? For example, we could think that it is a nice idea if Alice just uses her secret exponent to raise m to the power of d and send over the result when we are dividing by n and then taking the remainder, so mod n. And then Bob, who has the public exponent, can just raise s again to the power of e and check whether this actually gives us n, right? Does anyone see a problem with that? Okay, so the question is this secure? We are again at Mr. Krebs, who is trying to do stuff. And the question is now, could he construct a signature that will be accepted by Bob, while he's only knowing the public key NME, but not D? And in fact, he can. He can by just looking at how the public key works. So he can just pick some arbitrary so-called signature S and raise it to the power of E and claim that this is the message he wanted to sign anyways. If he sends over the message M and S to Bob, Bob will verify that M indeed is S raised to the power of E, so it will be accepted by Bob, even though Mr. Krebs did not know the secret exponent D. On the other hand, you might say, okay, but the result, if you just take some random element of the space and raise it to the power of e, the result might not be looking convincing to Bob, right? It could be just some random string, can't even make sense of it. However, there are also very targeted attacks that allow Mr. Krabs to sign any message M star he likes. And the way you can do this is by exploiting the multiplicative structure of the RSA function. So if you verify, this preserves multiplication. Or more formally, if you multiply two elements, S1 and S2, and you raise to the power of e, and this is exactly the same modulo n, then if you raise the two things separately to the power of e and then multiply. And you can use this to do some kind of blinding attack. So what you could do would be to pick some arbitrary message M1 for which you find an inverse, the multiplicative inverse. You ask for a signature for S1, which doesn't have anything to do with M star, so you are allowed to do that. You get a signature. And then you also ask for a signature of the blinded message M star. By blinded, I mean that you multiply M star with the inverse of M1. And you will also get a signature because it's also by M1. But if you multiply the two messages, M1 and M2, you will exactly get M star. And the two signatures you just obtained will allow you to sign the message M star with the product of those two signatures. You can just check this later. Okay, so we saw an attack that is pretty mean because it allows you to basically sign any message you like and convince Bob that this was a signature. And to prevent this, we will slightly tweak the signature scheme. The main idea is to apply the RSA approach not to a message from this set of numbers smaller than n, but to feed the message through a hash function which maps into the set, and then apply RSA. So one advantage is that we can now suddenly sign arbitrary length messages, because we have a hash function that takes arbitrary length messages and sends them to the set. Of course, we have to be careful with the details, but this is the main idea. And the second advantage is that this targeted attack that we saw on the last slide is a lot harder, because now you wouldn't be able to just blind the messages. Now you would need to find hash values such that the hash values have this nice multiplicative property. And if the hash function is good, then this should be sufficiently hard for the attacker not to be able to come up with such a triplet. And this idea in general is so nice that we even made it a general cooking recipe we call full domain hash. So this is just an abstraction of what we saw before. We take some trapdoor one-way permutation, like the RSA function. And what we want from this function is that computing it in the forward direction using the public key is easy. For example, raising x to the power of e is easy. But taking the inverse, which involves the secret key, is quite hard when you do not know the secret key. Yeah, and then to sign a message, Alice will be asked to compute the inverse of some hash value using the secret key, send this over, and Bob can easily verify because computing in the forward direction is easy, and you can just check whether the forward direction actually maps back to the hash function evaluated on M. Yeah, I guess there are other approaches which we'll skip, but you will probably see them in the following talks anyways. Main takeaway is that, again, we have a cooking recipe for building signatures built from something that's simple, called a trapdoor function. We can use this Lego approach to, exactly what I just said. There are also other recipes you will learn about throughout this week. And what we also saw was that all public key constructions we are talking about require the assumption that some computational problem is hard to solve. And in practice, we think it's very, very unlikely that we will ever be able to do public key crypto systems without such a hard assumption, because it would mean a major breakthrough in complexity theory. Okay, what we also didn't talk about so far is how we prove security against quantum attackers, which Chris will be doing in a few minutes. Yeah, and this is just an overview over some of the nice problems with which we could replace the assumption that the RSA function is hard to import. So there is a lattice-based stuff, which Wesley will be talking about on Thursday. There's multivariable polynomial equations, which we will be talking about on Friday. There's decoding error-correcting codes, and there's attacking hash functions. And with that, I will probably conclude my talk and maybe answer your questions.